Tonight's Enforcement Directorate initiates FEMA probe against BBC India. In fact, earlier Enforcement Directorate had recorded statements of several BBC staffers. So Enforcement Directorate initiating Foreign Exchange Management Act. In fact, probe under FEMA, probe under Foreign Exchange Management Act has been initiated by the Enforcement Directorate against BBC India. In fact, since last month, ED has recorded statements of several BBC executives as well as staffers. Agency has initiated FEMA investigation post the IT survey, which happened sometime in February. So that's the breaking update. Enforcement Directorate initiating a FEMA probe against BBC India. Probe under Foreign Exchange Management Act has been initiated against BBC. So that's the breaking update that we are getting. In fact, this probe post the IT survey, which we saw in February, which was conducted across BBC offices in the country. Enforcement Directorate now initiating a FEMA investigation against the BBC. Enforcement Directorate had, in fact, recorded statements of several BBC staffers and BBC executives in India. Agency initiating FEMA investigation post IT survey that happened in offices of BBC in the country in the month of February. So that's the latest that we're picking up. Enforcement Directorate initiating probe under Foreign Exchange Management Act against the BBC. All right, we have Bhavtosh joining us on the story. Bhavtosh, this is a big development there. Enforcement Directorate initiating FEMA probe against BBC.
Yes, Radhika. In fact, it's a very big development. Remember, it was early this year that Income Tax Department had carried out a survey on BBC premises, both here in Delhi as well as in Mumbai, post which the Enforcement Directorate has initiated a FEMA proceedings against the BBC. Sources within ED has said that this is not a new proceedings, that these are civil proceedings in which they are only checking the financial records as well as book of account of BBC. After Income Tax had carried out a survey, they issued a very detailed statement in which they had said that there are certain anomalies in their book of record that required, in fact, to carry out that survey. But there was virtual, in fact, the survey led to a Pandora's box being opened in which opposition blamed the center only because of a controversial documentary that was about to be aired by BBC. The Enforcement Directorate has said that it has nothing to do with that. But for past 1.5 months, various senior executives of BBC as well as some editorial staffers of editorial position have been called in by the BBC here in Delhi. Their statements are being recorded, but one has to wait and see what BBC will be saying this time around, because previously when the Income Tax Department had carried out survey, BBC had said that they will be cooperating with the agency and they hope that this investigation, in fact, the investigation gets over as soon as possible.
All right, thank you, Bhavtosh, for bringing all those details. So, crackdown on BBC India continues. Enforcement Directorate initiating FEMA probe against BBC India.